Welcome to the Royal Television Society webinar on normal people.
Good evening, everyone. Farum Fear Falter of Gach den Ansaisteach. You're very welcome to tonight's webinar on normal people, working with sound for drama, presented by the Republic of Ireland Centre of the Royal Television Society. This centre was founded 26 years ago, so we are well into our third decade, during which time our aim is to fulfil the objectives of the RTS, which are promotion and education in the art and science of television, the development of skills, and the setting of standards in creativity and technology. In that regard, tonight's topic, working with sound for drama, is an exact fit for those aims. It's a subject we had been considering even before the lockdown as part of a series on the different constituent parts of television production and of the art and craft involved in each one. And speaking of the lockdown, who could possibly have foreseen that it could have produced such a bona fide worldwide hit as Normal People turned out to be? Everywhere people are watching and absorbed in the trials of Marianne and Connell. The black cloud of the lockdown had a silver lining, if that's not too trite. Not going out, you see, provided a need for entertainment for everyone who had to stay at home. And social media provided the water cooler element. Now, tonight's panelists are Neil O'Sullivan, who is production sound mixer on Normal People, and Steve Flanagan, who's the sound designer and re-recording mixer. And they're going to provide a professional insight into the excitement and glory of television sound. Sound can sometimes be a little overlooked in the glamour of television production, but any professional knows its true importance. In my own career as an editor and as a producer-director, I always felt that whereas the power of the image attracted and held the attention of the audience, it was the sound which gave that image its importance and significance in the telling of the story. Tonight's host is Dr. Helen Doherty of the Royal Television Society Republic of Ireland Committee, and I'm going to now hand over to Helen.
Thank you, Agnes. Just a few points about this webinar. The duration of the event is 1 hour, and this discussion will be recorded and uploaded to the RTS website in a few weeks. And so we hope to provide television students with material for future research, including our carefully curated backgrounds. Now, for your input, please use the Q&A function. We won't be looking at the discussion function for the duration of this event, and we'll be taking questions later by themes rather than by individuals. So just briefly, what we aim for in this event is to bring together our two professionals who worked on the same production team so that they can foreground their craft and the art of how to use sound to capture a story. So with us, for those who've just joined us, are Neil O'Sullivan, who's a production sound mixer, and Steve Flanagan, who's a sound designer and re-recording mixer. And Neil and Steve will tell us how they work on those different roles in just a minute. So the structure of this webinar is that when Neil and Steve have introduced themselves, we'll play clips of two quite different scenes from Normal People, the television series. Neil will introduce the first scene to tell us what to listen out for, and that will be followed by a short discussion about the scene. And then Steve will introduce us to the second scene with a short discussion afterwards. Now, I want to reassure you that we have tested the video, but if the technology doesn't work, both Neil and Steve are happily prepared to describe how they worked with a particular narrative topic. And afterwards, you can still go to the series that's still available on streaming platforms such as BBC and RTE. Then towards the end of the hour, we will take questions that have not already been covered by the discussion. And finally, Agnes will come back with a few words after that discussion to close this event. So, Neil, over to you. You're a production sound mixer. Can you tell us something about your role on production?
Maybe I'll just, myself and Steve do one very similar thing. We push up a fader and pull down a fader. That's the crux of it. There is a lot more. We do it in two completely different places. I push up my fader on location and pull it down at the end of the production. Then maybe it could be a month later or 6 months later, Steve will push up his fader in post-production and pull it down after whenever the show has gone to air. So there we work in entirely different places, but we deal with the same bread and butter. So what I do is record the sound on location, on the set. I am answerable to the director and the script, really. In this case, it was the wonderful Lenny Abrahamson, who is a wonderful man to work with. He is. Thank you, Lenny, for making our lives easier. I also work for Steve Flanagan, and no one really knows that but me and him. So in the back of my head, when I come to anything, I'm thinking, what does Steve look? What is he looking for out of this? What can I give him? So they're the people I work for. I work with. I'm not by myself. I have. I sit behind a mixing desk and a recorder. You'll see with a couple of monitors in front of me, headphones on, and there's 2 or 3 people working with me, boom swingers, and usually a trainee. And I talk to them on my little microphone, and I tell them where I advise them maybe where they might put a microphone, or what we need to do to get through this scene. They will, of course, tell me something completely different. So we're not doing that. That's rubbish. Don't be stupid. Or they'll completely ignore me. Or just bring me a cup of coffee and say, well, you just keep doing your thing there. That's life on location. Without those boys, well, it would never happen. So we are very much a tight little team, all connected with headphones, living in our own tiny separate world within this mad circus that is the film set. What I'm there for is I'm there to record recording the sound sounds just push up a microphone and press go and hope that it happens. But there's an awful lot more to it. First is the scene. I mean, I've read the scene. I've read the script, read the scene. Well, weeks, months, hopefully, ideally months beforehand, and we'll try and figure what the needs of the script are in that scene. Now, if it's a simple scene in a nice, quiet indoor location, it's usually pretty straightforward. But sometimes that nice, quiet location, that small, quiet room, is backing onto a motorway, a building site, or we have built half that room in another room, and the acoustic of that room is not at all what it looks like on screen. So this is quite common, and we had it on Normal People a bit, where we had built sets within other locations. And now these aren't studios; these are other locations. We have built a set. That can be. We really have to be all over that weeks before we get there, because it's the designer is not, the set designer and the construction are not really thinking about sound, so I have to be there to remind them. I mean they're all always very obliging and do everything they can, but it's not their principal role. Seems to be how does it look, which is understandable because we are working in film and television, and it is kind of a visual medium. But of course, myself and Steve will disagree with that.
So we can,
We
can go on to Steve, but a few people have joined us. So for those who have just joined us, Neil O'Sullivan has just been explaining his role as a production sound mixer. And we're going next to Steve Fannigan, who is a sound designer and re-recording mixer. He's just going to give us now a general overview of what your role is on production and post-production before we go into the clips. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Helen. Similarly to Neil, I'm working in a team of people. My job is very much about sound effects and Foley. So in sound editorial, I work very much on the sound that we'll be adding and the world that we'll be creating around the dialogue that Neil's captured on set, around the sound that's been captured on set. And in the case of Normal People, my colleague Niall Brady, who's our dialogue and ADR supervisor, will be working with the production sound and location sound and cleaning up those tracks. And basically getting them into a shape where we can mix the show. In between Neil's process on set and when the work comes to us in sound post, there's going to be the film editing, the picture editing. And in the case of we're going to talk about two scenes from episodes from Lenny Abramson's block, and both of those were cut by a film editor called Nathan Nugent. So I think it's important to say that Nathan really is the person in this scenario who has the first pass on the sound, because as he's cutting picture, he's always making sound decisions as well. And a lot of the performance he's looking for isn't just about how something looks, it's about how something feels and how something sounds. So there's a filter that's happened before any of that material comes to us. And when we start in the sound post work, we're looking at his pass on that edit. And in the case of Normal People, we started before episodes were locked, so we're seeing early cuts and we're beginning to work with sound at that point. And so from a sound editing point of view, that's where my work begins and Na's work begins. And then at the mix phase, we are pulling together then that meticulously edited dialogue and any added dialogue in the way of ADR, and then working with the sound effects and the Foley and any more abstract sound design alongside score and source music to create the final mix of each episode. So there's two parts to my job, because I work in sound editing and in re-recording mixing. And I suppose as we discuss the clips, it will be easier to talk about the specifics of what that work are. But ultimately, from a sound design point of view, we're trying to figure out the overall sound of each episode, each scene in each episode, but then also the entire series, and make sure that we are creating a world sound-wise that feels truthful to the world portrayed on the screen, and also that feels consistent and unique to the series and the show and the story that we're telling, if that makes sense.
Steve, I know I've got a question for you almost immediately, but we've got quite a number of people who will not be familiar with some terminology. And for those who don't know Foley, could you briefly explain?
So Foley, the best way to describe Foley is that it's part of the sound effects end of the work, but it's something that I don't do. It's something we employ a Foley artist and a Foley mixer to perform and record for us. In this case, Quiva Doyle and Jonathan Reynolds. And so what the best way to think about Foley in terms of the effects is that it's the sound of anything that a character comes in contact with. So if you see one of our actors walking, Foley will record those footsteps. If you see them touch them, grab their hands or pat shoulders or make contact with a door frame or a steering wheel in the car, they'll perform and record that. And they record these unique, specific sound effects along with picture. So they take the cut onto the Foley stage, they pick the shoe, they pick the surface, they try to mic the acoustic appropriately, and they try to recreate a truthful version of that specific sound, and that will marry to what the actor is doing on screen. And
well, I just interrupt there and explain that if I were to record live Foley, if I were to record the actor shuffling from foot to foot, when it came to cutting it, you would end up with possibly 3 or 4 or 5 takes of different actors, the 2 or 3 actors all shuffling and scraping at the same time. So a lot of my role is to take out a natural sound like that and make sure we don't get overlaps of footsteps or glasses going down.
Absolutely.
And also it locks it to the timeline. So when I put my glass down off set, that has locked it. If we don't see that, it's completely free by the time it gets to Steve, who will place that carefully where it belongs.
Absolutely, and a huge part of the Foley process as well is Foley editing. So after they record and perform all those sounds, in this case we had 3 different Foley editors we worked with for different episodes. There's Brandon Rehill, Michelle McCormick, and Michelle Kniff, and they go through and work frame by frame to put that material meticulously in sync with the picture, but also listening to what's on the production track and making sure that if we can hear a character's footstep or a glass down, that the Foley is put in exactly the same place so that we don't hear that same action happen more than once. And so
I will try and get that once I record. We might have a wide shot, an establishing shot, where you let all the noises go, and that's giving Steve a really good sense of what it actually sounds like. But he's not usually going to go with what I've recorded. He usually will go with the Foley.
Yeah, and actually, what often happens is, again, in the dialogue editing pass on the episodes, Niall will be working through that material and he will split those effects into what we call production effects. So they won't be on his dialogue tracks, they'll be on other tracks called production effects. And so we will have the option then of using those along with Foley or on their own, or maybe along with Foley and some sound effects. And essentially sometimes those sounds from set are just so remarkably true to the world that they're perfect. And sometimes you want to give them something added that's more focused and more detailed because it does something that feels more truthful or more dramatic or more in place of where you're at dramatically in the story. So, the process is constantly about trying to figure out what's best at any moment in any scene. And often the sound you hear is a combination of material from set, material from Foley, material from sound effects. And, each of those decisions we're trying to make as we do the sound edit and then really refine with the director as we're mixing.
So I think it's time to test the technology with clip number 1. I'll share the screen with the still as we're about to start. And while I'm doing that, Neil, if you can tell us something about your intention in terms of being on set as the production sound mixer, so that when we're watching and listening, we know what to listen and watch out for.
Certainly. So this scene we are going to have a listen to is when Marianne and Connell first, not they have known each other for a long time, I think, but it's the first romantic expression to each other, I think. It's a really beautiful scene, and it's set in the Marianne's family grandiose home in the Sligo countryside, which was Enniskerry. And it's just we did it really earlier on the scene, and it really knocked it home to me what a fabulous cast we had. They were just wonderful to work with, but the energy on set in the room of this was unbelievable. and I covered it just with 2 boom microphones. And there was just this life. There's just such life to this scene. It's just a really beautiful scene. And so my job here was to catch. I mean, it sounds a bit bullshitty, but I like to try and capture the acoustic integrity of a performance. And I think this is the perfect example of when it works right.
Okay, shall I play?
It's just a beautiful scene. So Helen, roll it if you would.
You can borrow it if you like.
No, I've actually read it already. I don't know why I picked it up.
Any good?
Yeah, I liked it. You'd like it, actually. It's got a lot about feminism and all that.
Do your friends know? You read so much.
Yeah, they wouldn't really be interested in all that stuff.
You mean they're not interested in the world around them?
Not in the same way that we would be, but they have their own interests, I suppose.
Right. Like bragging about who they're having sex with.
Yeah, they can do a bit of that. I'm not defending it.
Doesn't it bother you?
No, most of it wouldn't. And then they do some stuff that's a bit over the line, and that would bother me, obviously, but they're my friends at the end of the day. It's different for you.
Why is it different?
Yeah. You know, you were saying the other day that you like me. But by the photocopier, you said it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you mean like as a friend or what?
No. Not just as a friend.
Okay, I thought that might be implied. I just wasn't sure. See, I'm just a little confused about what I feel. I think it'd be awkward in school if something happened with us.
No one would have to know. That was nice.
All right, what are you laughing for?
Nothing.
Well, you're acting like you've never been kissed before.
I haven't.
Can't help but smile. It's just so beautiful. It's really wonderful. Yeah.
So can you tell
How
us
did we do that?
how you prepared for that scene, and then how you both worked together as production sound mixer and sound designer re-recorder mixer?
Well, the pre-production that went into that was I read the script, whatever, 6 months beforehand. It was such a lovely location. It was at the house in Enniskerry. There was very little wrong with it. There was so there was no bad acoustic in the room. The rooms were carpeted and warm. There wasn't much to pre-production to this one. We had to cover our ass. So I would have had two boom operators, fellas with microphones and sticks. Covering both sides of this, because remember it was shot. There's two sides to every scene. I had it covered with all the cast wear radio mics all the time. and that is really just for backup. So they would have been wired. I would have had to think about their costume, what they were wearing, where the microphones were going to go. Quite often you can have a silk shirt against some other material that makes a ridiculous noise. We have to be ready for that and either have flagged costume that's an issue, or find a workaround. But ideally, it's those two microphones overhead capturing that energy. And you can't really hear on the web. The web is kind of the compression ratio is a bit heavy, so you can't hear the wonderful sound of the room, and Paul's wonderful which is wonderful. He makes these little noises all the time, which are such a big part of his character. Just I can't do them. I won't. So I had to be. We would cover every noise Paul made. We knew about, and we got it.
Neil, can I just?
There were problems with the house too. But we had a cistern. So the green room was upstairs from us. So if that had to be locked down 20 minutes before we shot anything. And of course, somebody would sneak in and no, but I have to rinse this, whatever it is. Another 20 minutes to wait while the cistern fills.
Can I intervene just briefly in the spirit of just being clear for everybody who may be listening in? You said obviously there are two sides to every scene. Could you just explain that in a sentence or two, why that is?
Well, there's a typical way I think most scenes are shot. You will shoot, now the order quite often changes, but there will be a wide shot where the cast will come into the shot, do their exchange, and in that shot you establish the geography of it and the theatre of it. And then you work around the room. So if you've got three characters, you'll work the first character, second, and third. I know that's three sides to one scene, four sides, and quite often then you'll shoot. We will shoot cutaways, over the shoulders, art shots, so they are the three sides to four sides to.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, do you want to come in here to discuss how you would then work with Neil on the other part of your part of the sound re-recording and sound designing?
Yeah, absolutely. So like one of the things about this scene is that, as Neil mentioned at the head, it's sort of the first moment of intimacy between them. And I suppose we've been anticipating this along with them from the beginning of the episode. And so we come off the back of a GAA match where things have been quite lively. They're on the bus afterwards, and there's quite a beautiful little shared moment, unspoken moment between the two of them sitting beside each other. And then we cut to later in the day, and Connell's in his car, and he makes the decision to go. He's going to her house to collect his mother, who works at the house. And so, as he gets out of the car, one of the things we know we're trying to do is build to this moment of intimacy. And build to this moment of stillness. So I think what was an important idea for us at this point, and when I say us, I'm talking about Lenny, and I'm talking about Nathan, I'm talking about producers, and all the different sort of ideas and input that go into the creativity of putting a scene like this together. But so we very much wanted to present the world as a lively space. So Marianne lives in this beautiful house. It's set back from a road. Where she lives says something about her class and something about her status that's different to Connell's. And I think, so the world around her house, the sounds we're adding and the world we're trying to build up with atmosphere is something more secluded, and it's something richer than where he lives. And so you're not hearing traffic, but you are hearing naturalistic sounds like bird sounds and that sort of sound of the courtyard where he pulls up and parks. So there's a bit of wind in the trees and just that general ambience of a nice secluded country spot. And as he then knocks on our door and he goes in, and we continue to play that natural sound, albeit from outside the door once he's inside, as well as building up some room tones, and there's a grandfather clock and a couple of small details that are just sort of peppered through the scene to present what the sound of a house like this might be. But as we then get into the scene and the two of them move closer to each other, we're sort of at that point beginning, over probably the course of a minute or a minute and a half, to remove as much of that sound as we can. So the sound very much focuses on the dialogue between the two of them, but also the sort of non-verbal sounds that each of them are making, whether it's a breath or a lip smack or a swallow or a tummy rumble, tiny little details. And some of the Foley is just about a head turn. So you just hear a little cloth shuffle, or Connell's handling of the book is quite heightened in this scene because it's the one object between them in a funny way. So it has a significance. And I suppose ultimately what you're trying to do with the sound is just follow the picture. The way that the performances are so strong here, and the way that this scene is shot, it's handheld, and the sort of closeness and intimacy established by the performances, the direction, the shooting, and the editing all suggest that we're just in that room with them. And so it felt like the sound had to sort of reflect that, so that we feel like we're right up close with them. And if we were in the room with them, we would not only hear the breath, but we'd feel it. And hopefully by focusing on it in the final mix, you're putting the audience in that position where they can imagine what it's like to be in that close exchange between the two of them. And so, all of those decisions are, they actually, seem like this kind of, as you work on it, and like we begin to, it speaks to you, it tells you what it needs, it tells you what it doesn't need, most importantly, and that sort of filtering process happens. And Niall Brady, our dialogue and ADR supervisor, will have done a really meticulous job in cleaning up the production tracks, because those angle changes that Neil was talking about, the sound is always different angle to angle. The dialogue generally, when it's recorded well, will have the same fidelity and the same integrity, but often just the mic moving 180 degrees to the other side of the room, the room tone or whatever the inherent noise in the room will change. And so Niall's gone through and done a pass where he's tried to smooth that out as much as possible as well, so that you don't feel the cuts, and so that you don't, all that you feel as an audience member hopefully is in the scene with them, and that it is progressing as you would hope and anticipate with them, if that makes sense.
And Neil, do you want to add anything to that, Neil, before we go on to clip number 2?
No, I think Steve has it there. Let's look at the other one.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would say, sorry, Helen, just obviously what we played and how we're listening to it now, a lot of that detail that I'm talking about is just, it's lost in this version of a call like this. But if this is of interest, or if anything that we've been talking about is of interest, obviously we're encouraging you to go back and look at these scenes on the RT player, the BBC iPlayer at the moment, because hopefully if you go and listen to them at full quality, you'll be able to hear that work.
Well, maybe one thing about that scene is Stephen Rennicks's, another Stephen's beautiful music, and the way it's there before you know it's there. It's not intrusive at all, and it's sympathetic to the moment. It's incredible. He did incredible work on that.
Absolutely, and the previous time that we've heard that cue is in that beautiful exchange earlier in the episode before the GAA match, where the pair of them have a really honest conversation in the corridor. And so the reprising of that motif sort of at this point is a really kind of lovely thing to be able to do. And that was something that happened quite late in the process as well. You know, that was a decision that was made probably late in the mixing process after we would have screened it for the first time, which is, it's always really interesting how music works and how and where it will be placed and what it contributes. And in this case, as you're saying, it's just doing a lovely
But
thing.
it would have been fun having Stephen Rennick on set with his piano at the same time too. Maybe we should do that next time.
So the first clip was capturing the moment of two people who are captivated by each other. And you chose the second clip because it's quite a strong contrast in different ways. Would you like to give us an overview of what to listen out for there, Steve, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So this next clip is from episode 4. So we're quite, a few episodes on in the series. We're in Trinity. So, and actually at this point in the episode, we're about 14 minutes into the episode and we haven't seen Marianne at all yet. We've just been living with Connell for this 14 minutes of the episode so far. And so he goes to this college party. And one of the things about where Connell is at in the story at this point is that he's moved to Trinity and he's a bit of a fish out of water. He hasn't really found his feet yet. He hasn't found a cohort of people that he's hanging out with. He's kind of, he's a little bit sort of alienated and disenfranchised. So his experience of Dublin and of Trinity to this point is one of alienation. And I suppose sound-wise, what we were thinking about, he sort of reluctantly accepts this invitation to a party and he's really not sure whether he wants to go, and his mother sort of convinces him over a phone call. So he arrives into Garrett's place in the Rubrics in Trinity, and he's where we're landing in here, he's sort of walked in the door, he's had a look around, he hasn't seen the people that he knows. There's this really amazing piece of music by a band called Cadracola, and it's quite abrasive moment musically. And so he walks into this room, he doesn't know anyone, it's chaotic, and he's sort of just looking for an excuse to leave. So he hightails it out of there and bumps into Garrett on the stairs, and that's sort of where we enter into it. So I suppose at this point, we're trying to do something with the sound that reflects that alienation and that sort of unwelcoming feeling maybe that he has at this point in Trinity. But ultimately, it's about to lead to something way more welcome. And I suppose as this sequence progresses, we sort of, even though we're at a party, we sort of begin to drift back into that sort of more still type of sequence, like the one we've just watched, where he and Marianne reunite and are back together, physically back together. I mean, like in the same room and having a very honest conversation with each other that I suppose the two of them can only have with each other. And so the world disappears and the conversation takes over.
Okay, and we'll have a talk about that afterwards. So this is clip number 2 from episode 4.
Connell, good to see you, man. Good to see you.
Thanks,
yeah, how's it going?
Yeah, no, not too bad. How are you?
Nice backpack. Very 90s.
Thanks.
You know Jenny, right?
Yeah, I think we're in a seminar together.
Oh.
Well, let me get you a drink.
Have to.
Thank you.
What have we got here? Is beer okay for you?
Yeah, cheers. Thanks.
So you're not from Dublin then?
Sorry?
You're not from Dublin?
No, Sligo.
I can see that.
Yeah, my girlfriend's from Sligo actually.
All right, well, there you go. Yeah, you live here, do you?
Yeah, it's not bad for campus accommodation.
Oh, it's lovely, yeah. Do you have your own room and that?
Yeah, gotcha.
You're not sharing, are you?
Oh, I am, yeah.
Oh, that's brutal, man.
Jesus, what do you do if you want to have a girl over?
Or a guy.
Yeah.
It hasn't really been an issue so far, so.
Hey, listen, there's some people I want to meet.
Yeah,
Go on, do you want to? See you later. Sorry, man. Down here somewhere. Great party, right?
Yeah.
Marianne, there's someone I want you to meet. This is Connell.
Oh, right. Hi.
Conall Waldron, from beyond the grave.
When did you take up smoking?
We were at school together.
No way.
Gareth. Yeah, he's here now. He's here now. What is it? Right, come here, man. You're gonna want to hear this.
Back in a sec.
Hey, hello.
Well, how are you?
Yeah. I'm alright. Good.
Would you like a drink?
Oh, Gareth gave me this, so.
We can do better than that.
Nice.
So how do you know Gareth?
Oh, classes together. You two are going out?
Everyone seems to know him.
Yeah, he's one of these campus celebrities.
He'd love that.
I believe he's very active on multiple college committees.
I've missed you.
Yeah. Yeah, you too. I was a bit worried when you left school and that. I was pretty down about it.
Well, never hung out much during school hours.
Oh, yeah.
What about Rachel? You still together?
How'd you hear about that?
So quite a contrast there, and also presumably for being on set. Neil, can you start off with this one? We'll go to Steve then.
Yes, this was an interesting one. Firstly, the locations. The wonderful exterior in Trinity is in Trinity. The apartment that they go when they go up the stairs was a build in Enniskerry. So we had it built in the attic of the house in Enniskerry. So they were in completely different places. The two sides of the scene were shot at completely different times. So that there were, I think, might have been 3 weeks apart. So the interior was shot first. And that was one of those, the interior was one of those locations that if anyone moved, the whole set would creak. The floor of the house, it was, we had to put scaffolding under the floors because they were so worried about the ceiling of the house collapsing with the 30 cast members that were there. So you could imagine what the inherent noises of the location were. They were crazy. And then there was another one. We were right on top of the magic cistern that seemed to have a life of its own. The music we ran some live music just to get the vibe of the scene. Which was really helpful, and that helped with the actors getting the level of their voices just right. But once again, when we recorded those tight shots, there was nothing moving in that room at all. And my boom swingers and staff would have been in there policing, giving everyone hard stares. If ever anyone moved a muscle, they were getting the evil eye from Pete. The exterior is Trinity College, and I don't know if anyone knows Trinity College. Trinity College is not a college, it's a building site, and it always has been. Anytime I've been there, it's a nightmare. I think we shot that at magic hour, so it was most of it had disappeared. But usually you open a microphone in Trinity College and there is a Kango hammer. We were lucky in that also in a scene like that, because the exterior is up and the energy is up, you can get away with a bit more. But it was a tough one. That probably would have been, Steve can tell me this, played on radio mics, so the hidden microphones and the costumes would have probably caught most of the sound, whereas the interior would have been all boom microphone.
Somebody actually asked, I'm keeping an eye on questions as they're coming in, Neil. Somebody asked about how much you use radio mics for picking up sound.
It varies. We'll cover everything, because you never know what's going to happen. And you think the shot might be like the shot of me at the moment. It could be, I have the microphone there. But suddenly something might change, and that might happen. And that difference it's a huge difference sonically. Having the cover of a radio mic is really a backup. But there will also be other things. There will be a head turn where the cast will throw away a word, and the boom just can't catch it. And there's a T at the word of the. You were going very fast. The T might disappear from fast. I will have the T on the radio microphone, and Steve can snip that little T, or not radio, and put it up at the right level and where it should be, so it's seamless. So it's a sculpture. It's a sculpture, you know, the sound. We can use both in one scene, and well, ideally, my ideal would be that everything would be on the boom, because there is such richness to it. Whereas if you play a full scene on a radio mic, you really hear it. It's dead. It really is. So really, that's the deal with the radio mics. I hate the things, but they're a necessary evil.
And can you say something about how you worked together in that scene with Steve, you and Neil?
Yeah, so like as Neil said, there is it's one of the kind of the two locations, both the inside the party and outside the party. They're slightly hairier locations for than what we were looking at in the previous scene we watched. But again, the idea is always about trying to maintain the integrity of performance. I think there's a couple of lines in here that are ADR, a couple of words that are ADR, so stuff that we would have had to re-record after the fact just for clarity. But most of the time what we're doing is Niall is working very closely with those boom tracks, and then also cutting the radios and just making sure that we're covered. We always lean on the boom as our first port of call, and as Neil said, we're using the radios to supplement. And so there's a couple of things so obviously up at the party, we're when they perform that, as Neil said, there's just the dialogue between the three actors in the scene, and everything, everyone in the background is looking like they're talking, but they've been verbally silent, not necessarily movement silent on the day. And so part of my job is to try and build up the sound of that crowd, and we've done that in two ways. Now, Brady went and recorded crowd ADR with Luke Group, with I think there was 10 or 12 actors for that. And so they will perform sort of specifically watching the scenes and try to recreate some of that ambience. Neil will have recorded us a version of that from set with I think there was somewhere between 30 and 50 extras that day. So we'll have some of that. And then I'll pick stuff from an effects library that I think is also appropriate and try and just fill it out so that we're hearing some of the dialogue that's in the room with them. We're hearing some of the noise that's maybe outside, shouting and roaring that goes on at these sorts of parties, some of the stuff that's on the stairs in the room outside, and just trying to build up a truthful acoustic representation of that, and then taking the music and sort of doing a treatment on it so that it feels like it's in the room with them coming off a speaker. So it's not clean, it's a little muddy, and it's got a little bit of that acoustic of the room on it. And as Neil was saying, because on set they had some playback, the actors have performed as if they're speaking above a crowd and speaking above music, which is really helpful to us because it means we don't, when they do speak, we can still play that music and that crowd at a level that feels natural for a situation like that. Sometimes what can happen in those scenes is that the performance will be just normal conversation level, and that becomes a very tricky thing to make feel real in terms of the party sort of environment you want to create. And then when we go outside, there's sort of there's a conversation that happens off screen where Gareth gets pulled away by one of his pals, Philip. And it actually has a plot point later in the episode because there's been a noise complaint about Gareth's party. So Gareth's sort of pulled off in that direction to deal with that, which is great. So some of that was material that was shot on the day, and some of it's added lines of dialogue in ADR that sort of just flesh that out a little bit. And Foley have walked the pair of them off. And we also, the group that Marianne is with, we haven't met yet, but there are some very significant people in that group, like Jamie and Peggy and Joanna. And so we've got their voices in there as well. And while it's not something where we're trying to draw your attention to them, we're trying to feature them a little bit because they're going to appear later in the episode and through the series. So it's great to be able to do a little bit of foreshadowing of their existence in this group of friends that she has. And it's also, you know, what's so important here is that we're meeting Marianne at a point where she's really comfortable in Trinity, and she's found herself and she's found her gang. And that really contrasts Connell's experience. And it totally flips the dynamic of their relationship, where he was the popular kid in school and had the friends. And now it's kind of, the tables have turned. And I think ultimately you're trying to build to that moment where the two of them are back together upstairs having this really quite intimate conversation that only they can have. And I think if people go back and watch these scenes from the episodes on the players, what you'll hear when they do get upstairs and are having a drink and a chat is that the crowd, all of that stuff just slowly begins to disappear. The music begins to sort of get further backgrounded so that we just lean into their conversation. And I think there's a brilliant thing that Nathan and Lenny talked about when we spotted the episodes. And ultimately, I think as an audience, you're yearning for them to be together as two characters. And any of those scenes where we get to sort of sit with them and just see them talk to each other and I suppose appreciate each other and appreciate that communication they have both verbally and non-verbally between each other, it's sort of what the series is all about. So when you get this opportunity to lean into one of those conversations, it's just a really gorgeous thing to get to experience, I think, as a viewer. So there was just a lovely opportunity to do that here, and again, very much led by the way the sequence had been shot and performed and then edited, and we got to come in and do the sound work off the back of that.
I think we need to turn to the questions that people have been putting up for us, unless you've got anything else to say. We'll give you an opportunity to say a few things when we take questions, if that's okay. Thanks very much for enabling us to listen in a different way to both of those clips and your intentions for the art of the storytelling through sound. Some of the questions are more detailed, like how many scenes are shot, how much cleaning of the production recording tracks do you need to do, how many tracks do you record on location, how much of it is single camera. So those are the detailed ones. So if you can just checklist through some of them, that'd be really good.
I'm just looking at them. How many cameras were there is a good one, because this is always a bone of contention with me when we have two cameras. Thankfully, on this show, we had Susie Lavelle was the director of photography and the camera operator. you can't have two cameras because we don't have two Susie Lavelles. She's really, really wonderful. Anything anything she frames up is beautiful. The idea of having two cameras on that would be just two Picassos, and you just can't really do it. It's not right. When you get into two cameras, it's usually about saving time and saving money. So whilst I'm sure Susie and Lenny are well aware of these things, they're not fans of having multiple cameras on the same piece of action, because it is all about that one moment where Susie is doing her thing with the camera and the cast are there doing things, and everyone is symbiotically across that moment.
Yeah, and I think that links in with how many takes are on that production are normally shot.
It would vary. I think by the end of block 2, there might have been one scene where we did 14 or 15 takes on something. With block 1, it was 3 or 4. Usually, I mean, Lenny loves the rock and roll of the first take, and I agree with him entirely. But it's usually the first take is the only time that I have heard the scene in actually how it is, when it's quiet and oh my God, how can we get away with that? And I'm whispering to Pete on the boom, Pete, get in tighter, get in there. There's quite often chaos going on, so we'll go for Lenny, and of course Lenny will be oblivious to this. He won't have heard it at all, even though he is very sympathetic to our needs. And then there will be every other department who will have been going through a similar kind of hell for that moment. Oh God! So there will be another 3 or 4 takes, usually to cover up, to try and get over whatever those issues were. But ideally, the first take, certainly with Lenny, is quite often the one.
Mm. And
could I come in with a question?
I'd like to welcome Agnes back for the discussion, and we'll try to finish up in about 10 to 15 minutes. The Royal Television Society has given us an allowance of a little extra time. Thank you very much. I know some people might be leaving the webinar in about 5 minutes. And so for those of you who joined us, great to have you. And we'll stay on until about 22. Agnes.
Helen, an interesting question came up. It's directed to Steve, and it's: what creative decisions did you make to help transport the viewer to the contrasting locations of Italy and Sweden?
Oh yeah, so yeah, I guess again, obviously you're always led by decisions that have been made in the process, in the filmmaking process. So Italy and Sweden both occurred in Hetty MacDonald's episodes in block 2. So, there was Italy was very much about heat and very much about being able to use a very different spectrum sound-wise for nature. And so we were able to lean into what the natural sounds of that particular environment would be. And we wanted to make sure that we had a contrast between Marianne's family home, which is sort of secluded, and then down when we're in the piazza with them during that beautiful conversation that they share. And so we used a lot of sort of what I would consider sort of warmer climate than Ireland type insects and birds. And that episode, Brendan Rehill cut sound effects on that. So we had a good conversation about what we thought should be in there. And Hetty actually had this really kind of physical memory of what it sounded like when they shot. And obviously we could hear some elements of that on the production, but Neil had done a very good job at minimizing that sort of sound. So we're trying to add that back in. And so, yeah, so we were very much trying to lean into that when we're around the dinner table with them during that really kind of, the nightmare dinner, where Jamie and Connell are sort of having their whole vibe off with each other for Marianne's attention. you know, we were able to lean into some nice wind sounds because the trees behind, there's just a lovely summer breeze blowing through them. And I suppose it was just about being able to use sounds that you would never be able to use in an Irish context, because the wildlife and that sort of natural feeling is just quite different. And in the piazza, we sort of played off the idea of it being late summer and maybe there being some swallows, and actually on the production sound there was some jackdaws. So we sort of again were leaning into that idea. And by the time they go over and get back on their bikes, it's gotten quite windy. So we were able to play with that. And then in Sweden, on the Swedish episode, which is episode 9, had a lovely, brilliant sound effects editor called Anna Bertmark work on that episode with us. And she's based here in the UK with me, but she's originally from Sweden. So she brought this lovely memory of what growing up in Sweden was like to that episode. And again, you know, we were able to lean into it's snow, so we're in the winter time, so there's immediately something very different to everything we've seen elsewhere in the series. But also things like the sound of a pedestrian crossing or the sound of a siren in the distance. They're different, unique sounds to that part of the world. So it was, you know, it was a real gift to get to play with that stuff. And then, you know, there's restaurants and parties and all sorts of sequences in that where there's other people, and obviously they're in that position. We're in a world where English isn't the first language, so we were able to lean into sort of Swedish background dialogue, and just the richness of having that material at our disposal helped us to create a different world for them.
There's an interesting question from somebody called Ben Clark, and he asks 2 questions actually. One of them is, have you ever used a mic built into the camera when you're filming at extremely close quarters? That's for Neil. And for you, Steve, he also asks, so when the party scene conversation was filmed, was there 0 background noise on the set? No conversations, no music? I think Neil might have answered that a little to some extent already.
Yes. We do a rehearsal full volume, so I was playing back music in that scene for the rehearsals, and all the chat would be going full tilt. I would also record, do a take with no dialogue, or just a recording of just the atmos of 30 people screaming and shouting at the same time. I do both genders. I do the males, I do the females. I do it with footsteps, without footsteps. I was spoiled rotten on that one. I got it all. We were okay for time, I think, on that one. So, but when it gets to that shot or those shots, there will be silence. Or else, Ben's other question I see there is, have I ever used a microphone built into a camera? Well, I don't have cameras built into my microphones, would be my answer to that. No, I don't. And there are a number of reasons. Certainly in television and sport, you may do if it's just to get an effect. But the film camera is quite a different beast. Whilst they can record sound, it's not something we ever do. Also, I don't know if you've ever heard the noises that a camera operator or a focus puller can make. And also there's conversations that might go on. It's lunchtime. I don't know. What time do we start at? Those kind of things, they do happen. And they can happen, you know, between 2 really important bits of a scene. But that's life. And they can be dangerous. You could be talking about something else besides lunch. You could be talking about the cook, the chef, the editor. And it has happened to me in a previous life where I have got into trouble. No to camera mics. Steve might like them. I don't know.
No, and I mean, I think one of the things, particularly with, you know, the 2 blocks were different cinematographers, Susie Lavelle that Neil mentioned earlier, and Kate McCullough in the second block. And I mean, their job and their department's job is just all about capturing that frame. And so what Neil and his crew so expertly do is figure out how to work in that frame to put the mic in the right place for whomever is speaking or who is going to speak next. And if that was attached to the camera, even though the camera is as close as it is at times to these characters, it probably wouldn't be in the right place for their voice. And so that separation is a really important thing. It's also just really important that you've got a sound department that's thinking about sound on set, and you've got a camera department that's thinking about picture on set. Someone
asked about the party, Neil, and for both of you. You played music to get the vibe in the party. And
yes.
Someone is asking, how do you get it off the track? How do you deal with...
Well, we don't record it. We don't record it. It's for rehearsals, or we might do one take with the music so that we can capture the sound of the room. So I will record it cleanly from one machine to another, and also I'll be recording the acoustic of the room, of that music in the room at the same time, which gives you a truthful representation of what it gives Steve, because there might be a completely different piece of music by the time it gets to Steve, and quite likely will be. Sometimes it might be my choice of, Lenny might ask, would you play some music? And I will play something totally inappropriate, as I do.
Well, you know, an interesting scene to talk about that exact thing in is the Devs Fundraiser, which is in episode 3. And so a couple of days before they shot that sequence, Lenny had gotten in touch with me because he had picked some music that they were going to play back. And so the idea was basically, they were trying to figure out if there was a way that they could play back that wouldn't muddy up the production sound too much. So we made click tracks that were just bass drums, so that they'd be low enough frequency that they wouldn't interfere with the dialogue, and they were at the same tempo as the tracks that were being used. And it works to varying degrees of success, but the fact that Lenny was thinking about that and planning it in advance gave us a big advantage in terms of how we would work with it, and also how his editor would work with it, because ultimately, as I said, Nathan is going to be the person who has to take the first pass on that. And so if those two things can be pieced back together, and also hopefully not interfere too much with the dialogue, but we're always relying on versions of those scenes being shot without the music playing back, because we just need it as clean as possible, and the music can always be added back in. But the vibe that we were talking about earlier is very much about just giving, particularly like our leads, the idea that they need to project above this noise, and then the background actors an idea of what the rhythm of what's going on is, so that they're dancing in time with what eventually is going to be heard music-wise. And again, the same was true of the Devs itself in episode 3. And again, some of the material that was used on the day to get them in the mood and in the zone is the music that continued through. And again, and Lenny is someone who thinks about this stuff, so he had it planned in advance, and that's not necessarily always the case, but it is the ideal. And it's, for us, it's so brilliant when you have a director who's thinking that way.
There are a number of questions coming in on just some technical aspects, which we won't have time for. Where would you recommend that people go to find out further information about the technical aspects of your craft areas? Is there an association? Is there are there websites, publications?
I think location sound recording is somewhat a dark art. And finding out about it is, we're a grumpy bunch of fuckers. So it is hard to find out how to get in the door. We do have, we have Screen Audio Ireland, which is the Irish guild of production sound mixers and boom operators and trainees, and I think we have welcomed post into that pot too. Now not much. There's a lot of internal bitching goes on there. Really, it's what goes on there. But it's a great place to look at where we are, or who we are, or how many. There's maybe 30 sound mixers in the country, so it's not a huge amount. And there's maybe 10 of us who work all the time. So it's not a huge amount of people. And colleges.
But there are some great resources online. Like there's a brilliant site called designingsound.org. There's a couple of brilliant podcasts. Someone's just actually put it in the comments. There's a podcast called Tonebenders, and myself and Niall Brady and Anna Birthmark just recently did an episode about normal people, where we talk a little bit more in detail about our work through the series. Post Perspective is a great magazine. There's another podcast series called Soundworks Collection, which, and both of those podcasts are very international, but it's people, they talk to location sound mixers, they talk to sound designers and sound editors about art crafts. And so there's a treasure trove of stuff between those. And there's all sorts, like it's really worth, there's a site called A Sound Effect, which they do great interviews. There's a journalist called Jennifer Walden that does brilliant coverage of particularly soundpost work from all over the world. And so I think online there are a lot of really great resources for sort of, if you want to take a deep dive, and a lot of them focus per episode maybe on one project, so you can take a deep dive into, particularly around Oscar season, the nominees tend to have really good episodes. And for me, it's a constant, those are constant things that I'm learning from and listening to and getting inspiration from. So there's great resources.
A couple of minutes late. I'm sorry to cut you short there, Steve. And if you can answer this briefly, maybe also Agnes might have a question, and I'd like you both to finish up with maybe a few points you'd like people to think about. But a number of questions have come in about how do you get a start in sound in the film industry? One in particular asked, should you be a general person of all trades? Should you go for a specialization? And although somebody didn't ask this, there was a mention of, the lads in the department. So I presume also there are plenty of roles for women in the film industry and sound as well. Just a quick comment on how people might get in.
Yeah, I mean, I did say it's a dark art and we're all grumpy bastards, but we love to talk about what we do and how important we are. So we are very amenable if you do look on the Screen Audio Ireland website. I think there are contact details. Feel free to reach out that way, because we love talking about microphones. We are very, very boring.
And Steve?
Women in the, I just come into women in the department now, because that is something we are terribly short of. And there are 2 sound mixers in this country, the television sound mixers, 2 women, and that's it. There's no boom operators. There's no trainees that I'm aware of. There are a number in the UK, not huge numbers. I had a boom swinger here on the show Red Rock I did for 4 years. Jodie, who was over with us, who was fabulous. It was great to have her. It brings a completely kind of a different perspective to a scene, and it makes a lot of, I mean, in this show there was a lot of intimacy, and we were actually looking for a woman boom operator. We couldn't find her. I asked Jodie, she couldn't do it. It would have made it easier, but Pete is fabulous and has the diplomacy and sensitivity to get through these scenes and not interfere or affect the cast performance at all.
And I think
also making radio mic and stuff, sometimes it can be very useful
response to
to
the
have.
question somebody asked about recording the intimate scenes as well. We're really pushed for time. We need to finish in a few minutes. So do you mind if I go on then to Steve about people making a start in the
Yeah, well, just one thing that occurs to me in an Irish context right away is that Screen Training or Screen Skills Ireland have just launched a mentoringship program, and if you go to the Screen Skills Ireland website, there are a number of sound people on there. So that might be one way in, is to look for some sort of mentorship. My beginning, I had worked with sound. I didn't start doing this work till I was 30, but I had worked in sound for years before that in radio and music. So that's not exactly a direct route in, but I would, Screen Training Ireland and now Screen Skills Ireland ran an assistant sound editors program. And that was my first training. My introduction to Soundpost was through a Foley artist, Cuba Doyle, who I mentioned earlier, who worked in Normal People and has worked in a bunch of shows with me over the years. But I suppose there isn't a straight road in, but there are some avenues. And I think the mentorship or something like Screen Skills Ireland are hugely valuable resources. Here in the UK, it's the same idea. There's Screen Skills Net, and there's also, like BAFTA have mentorship programs. BEC2, which is the union here, which I'm a member of, are just launching an initiative actually, which speaks to both of the questions that you've asked. They're piecing together a mentorship for not just for sound, but also for less represented groups in sound currently. So I think that those sorts of initiatives are incredibly important at this point. There's nothing about sound work, either on location or in post, that is inherently male. It is, and it shouldn't be. And so we're all trying really hard to see a better equality in the work that we do. And my experience at Soundpost, actually, I was introduced to Soundpost by a woman, and when I started to work at Ardmore Sound, the supervising sound editors that I worked with, Sarah Gaines being one of them, there was a really good gender split at the time, and there still is. And 3 of these episodes of Normal People were mixed by one of my colleagues, Michelle Caniff. I've spoken about some of the women who worked on the crew with us as well. So it's an equal opportunities line of work, and it's just incredibly important that it's not seen as anything else. And we all have I think an important role to play in making sure that that's the case.
Thank you. And before we move on then to Agnes, finally, is there any one thing, Neil or Steve, or Neil and Steve, reducing it to one, that you'd like to have people thinking about when we close this webinar in a couple of minutes?
Like for me, it's just, I suppose, to think about sound as something that's not just technical. Think about it as something that is emotional and about performance and integrity, but also just about storytelling. And I think, as with any work in film, it's hugely about collaboration as well. And I think it's really important to think about it as, the idea of sound design and production design, or sound design and costume design. These things are it's another tool in your belt as a filmmaker to tell your story and to hopefully evoke mood, emotion, and feeling from your audience. And I think when we stop thinking about it as a technical process, we make better work.
I would have to agree 100% on that. There, you can ask a million questions about microphones. I use 2 types of microphones, really. I have loads, but there's 2 I use all the time. But it is not, it's what you do with them. It's the mark making. And the beauty of recording location sound is that mark making. When there's a crew of whatever, 15, 20 people on set, all doing the move. There's a focus putter doing this, someone else is doing that. My boom swinger is swinging out of a lampshade, trying to get his boom in. when all that works together and everyone's making the right mark at the right moment, it's a really beautiful thing. And I think that's what I love about it. That's my buzz. And I really think that's what everyone should strive for, because it's a wonderful trip when everyone gets it right.
I think they're really great comments to end on. Art and mark making, they're so complementary. Thanks for that. I'll move on to Agnes for just the last few words, and we'll be coming in just about on time.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you so much, Neil and Steve. I think we've learned, if we didn't already know, and we do, of course, that sound men are really sound. With mark making and storytelling, it's wonderful to keep bringing back to everything to the priority. Everything is in the service of the story and telling the story and how to tell it best and making the mark, as Neil said. We're so delighted. Who knew that sound could be so fascinating? So we're going to have to say goodbye, I'm afraid, friends. But we'll meet again soon, I hope, and I'm hoping perhaps to have more of these webinars if we can. In the meantime, anybody, and I hope everybody, would be interested in joining the Royal Television Society, just look at the website and look up membership, and you'll see the attractions that are there. Registered students are free. Young people have a special deal. It's 30 under 30. If you're under 30, you can join for a reduced fee. Similarly, retired people. Other people in the middle, I'm afraid, probably don't get such a favorable deal, but it's well worth it, no matter what level of entry you come in at. So thank you very much for attending, everyone. And thanks in particular to Neil and to Steve and to Helen for hosting a wonderful evening.